Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing marvelously well. I really feel very strongly that we have hit the mother lode here. We're going to be talking with Mr. Noel Hogan, who is a founding member, a guitar player, songwriter of the Cranberries, and also with Mr. Stephen Street, who, of course, produced the first two absolutely massive, huge albums, incredible albums, and produced their last three albums. So I'm very, very excited to talk to them. Thank you, Stephen, for setting this up. This is going to be an absolutely beautiful time. And without further ado, let's get talking about the Cranberries with Noel Hogan and Stephen Street. I see you were born in Limerick. Do you still live in Limerick?
Yeah.
Nice.
We had considered moving loads of times, but I mean, what ended up happening was we were away so much that coming home was like the holiday because you got to see your friends and family. And then once we started having kids, and then the grandparents are here, it just never really, someday we're going to move, and it never happened, And so we, Dolores was the only one really because she married a Canadian guy. She moved to Canada, but the rest of us, we always stayed here. And as I said, we would have years where, you live here, but you'd be lucky to spend 2 or 3 months here for a year if you added up all the days.
Yeah. I said that to Warren when I was last interviewed with him. I kind of went on to that point about how busy you were as a band. Once things started taking off, you just didn't stop touring. You were just either in the studio or touring. It was incredible.
Yeah. We thought every band did that. It's only years later you realise, we didn't have to work that hard. Yeah.
I do know, being based in America, that the only way, especially in those days, to break America was just tour, wasn't it?
Yeah, because we used to get asked that when we kind of broke first, and people would come back and they would go, "How come ye broke and this band didn't and that band didn't?" But we started to notice that a lot of bands from Europe would go to the States for like 2 or 3 weeks, and they'd do like the East Coast to West Coast and go home. And we kind of said, to us, that's why it didn't happen for them, because we'd go for 9 months, just round and round, the middle, the up, the down, wherever it would be. And I think, it paid off because of that. Whereas you're not going to get much done in 3 weeks, it's a full continent you're covering there. And you need to just, for us, it was, we just kind of dedicated. And sure, Steve, you even came over to do those demos for the second album. We didn't even have a chance to get home. You came to us in New York.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I explained that to Warren as well. That was the Magic Shop session that I talked about, Warren.
Well, if you don't mind, we'll do a little bit of chronological order, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you started the band with your brother, as we were talking about a second ago.
Yeah, it was Ferg, the drummer, myself and Mike, and we started, I suppose it was around 89, give or take, the kind of, and the real short version is we bought instruments and started a band because that's what everybody else was doing in town. And we used to go to a lot of gigs, and we were just getting to that age. We were kind of old enough to go to gigs. And but we noticed everyone that was playing in the shows, we knew them. We would have gone to school with them or hung around the same places. And we were really into music. So we started a band. A friend of ours who was in another local band, I bumped into him just by chance. And he was a drummer in that band. He wanted to be a singer. He joined with us for about 6 months. And now we were, as I said, we bought instruments, started a band. So you can imagine how bad we were. It was awful. But Noel he'd been in many bands, and we learned a lot from him and how a band should operate with songs and everything. He left, and it was through Noel then that we met Dolores. His girlfriend at the time knew Dolores. He met me one day again, and he said, "Look, are you still together?" I was like, "Yeah, it's just all instrumentals." And he goes, "Well, I know a girl that's looking for a band, but she doesn't want to do cover versions." And we were like, perfect. So Dolores came up. We played, I think it was Linger, like a kind of instrumental version of Linger, and another one or two. Dolores she sang one of her own songs, and she sang a song called Troy by Sinead O'Connor. And straight away it was like, there's that huge voice in that little person. And, that was it. Became the 4-piece that everybody knows.
As a guitar player and getting the band together, what were your personal influences? What did you want to bring to it sonically?
I guess, look, the common denominator between the four of us really was the Smiths were the one band we were all really, really into. And that kind of started like, we were into The Cure and New Order, Echo and the Bunnymen, that kind of 80s, kind of what would have been alternative at the time. And very guitar, kind of very English, guitar bands. And we kind of wanted to be like that. That's what we wanted to be. And the Cranberries sound, really, a lot of it is us not being good enough musicians to kind of sound the same as that, but this was as close as we could do. And that was it. And, Dolores had come from a different background then, because she had been playing and singing since she was a child. She was far more advanced than us. She could play piano, play guitar. She knew, the rules of music, things that, we had no idea and didn't really want to know. We were just happy to kind of trash it out there. But it was great because Dolores kind of was able to guide us then when you came in with stuff that, maybe try it this way or that way. And I think that it was just that combination of the four of us bringing something, each one kind of brought their own thing to the table. And then within the band, everybody was kind of into other things as well. And it just seemed to work, I think, when the four of us were together.
So did you seek out Stephen for the Smiths connection? How did that happen?
We got signed, and we had started, that one, Steve, we started the album with a guy who owned a local studio here. And he was kind of managing us at the time. And it just didn't work. We did 3 weeks and it was, it didn't sound like us. And we parted ways with him. And we'd spent a lot of money at this point. And we thought, the record company isn't really going to go for this. And thankfully, the guy who signed us, a guy called Denny Cordell, was very patient with us and saw the bigger picture. And he kind of just came over and said, "Who do you want?" And we said Stephen, but to be honest, I didn't think he'd do it. I know you're there now, Steve, but I kind of thought, we were only playing together maybe a year at that point. And, we thought it was kind of a bit above us and probably a bit cheeky to ask. But at the time, I think Viva Hate was out and it was huge. It was, especially in our world, that would have been a big, big deal. So when I think you came to see us, Steve, then in London and agreed to do it.
Well, this is a few years later, though, isn't it? Because, Viva Hate came out in 88. So I think I came to see you. It was after I had done the first Blur record, Leisure.
Yeah. So was it around 1990, 91?
Yeah, because I always remember I bumped into Graham Coxon at your gig.
Yeah.
Denny Cordell asked me to come into Island Records and he played me some stuff. And I said, yeah, I'd like to work with them. But I said, but if they're doing any gigs, I'd like to see them. And that's when I came to see you play at the Marquee.
Yeah.
And Graham was there because Graham was going through a difficult period recording the second Blur album, Modern Life is Rubbish. So that was, it was around early mid-90s. Yeah, 92, I think it might be.
Yeah. Like, to be honest, it was one thing asking, but then when you agreed to do it, it was like, oh okay.
Yeah. As you remember, we were only given really clearance to go and do a couple of weeks as a test session, weren't we?
That's right. I think we had 6 days in Dublin to see how it would work, and we did that, and there was a Windmill 2, I think it was called at the time.
Yeah, there's the one on St. Stephen's Square.
Yeah, it's long gone now since then. Yeah. But we did a week or so there, and then Denny came in. He flew in, and we were all quite nervous about that. But I just remember him having a big smile on his face, listening back to whatever it was. We had done maybe 3 or 4 songs.
Yeah, I know Dreams was in that first session.
Yeah, and I think Wanted was one of those as well, I remember.
Yeah.
But he just said, keep going. And that's exactly what we did. And they kind of left us alone then, really, at that point.
It was great.
Now, Stephen, the other day you told me that Denny had said don't do Linger yet?
When I first heard the original demo tape at Ireland, Linger was one of the songs they played. And when I said, oh, yeah, that's a good one, let's do that. And he said, can you just hold off on that one? We're not sure what we're going to do with that one yet. Just go and just choose some of the others. So I said, well, let me do Dreams then, because that was obvious, because when you do a session with a band, you do want to hopefully come out of it with a track that could be a hit, because obviously that's going to be the thing that gets you the job, hopefully, So I do remember Dreams being in the first bunch that we recorded, but we didn't do Linger until we were given the go-ahead by the label to do the whole album, and that's when we tackled Linger.
Yeah, that's right. Because once there was always that kind of stigma around Linger. We knew it was going to be like even with the demos, it stood out. I think. Amongst the other songs, and Denny kind of almost obsessed a little bit about that it was, the jewel that had to be kind of kept.
It was a difficult one to get right, wasn't it? Do you remember?
Yeah, there was a lot of redos on that, and we'd think that's done, and then we'd come in the next day and you'd be like, I think we need to do that again, and but I mean, even after, I'm kind of jumping forward here a bit, but even after we considered that we were finished, the four of us and yourself, Steve, if you remember rightly, the A&R guy at the time, it was kind of, he dealt out of the London office and Denny was based in New York. He went in and did another mix of it at one point, I think.
Oh, yeah. When it first came out and didn't do that well, there was some doubt, obviously, within Island Records about whether the mix was right of the whole thing, but especially the singles. And you're right. I think it was a Dave Baskin mix. I think
it was Dave Baskin, and then I remember the A&R guy himself had a go at it.
Did he have a go at it as well? There you go.
Yeah, we found out after the fact, but it was like, what? That's kind of yeah. Sure, why not? And it just, and I mean, at the end of the day, the one that everybody knows is the version that we did.
The version we did, yeah.
What do you guys attribute that to? The fact that it wasn't, I mean, obviously became a massive hit and synonymous with you guys. But what do you attribute to initially not being a massive hit?
There was the problem that we did the demos and, they were kind of sent out to everybody. We weren't even signed at the time. And we were trying to kind of get a name for ourselves in the UK. We kind of bypassed Ireland completely. We'd go over and back and kind of tour the UK. So a lot of the press had the demos for a long time before we ever got in to do the album. And Linger was on there. And I know it's a different version in mix-wise and sounds and everything. But I think they weren't really that excited about it because to them was a song that was a couple of years old. And even though the general public may have never heard that. Yeah. It was just play something new, and it kind of, the album came out and it didn't really, there wasn't much fanfare about it at all. It just kind of, it came and went, and the few hardcore fans we did have, bought it, but I mean, it really, I don't think it got in the top 100. I can't recall the exact figure, but we thought we were going to be dropped. It was back in those days where, the record company spent money. If they didn't see it back straight away, it was, goodbye. And we genuinely thought, there isn't much life left in this yet because of, the album not succeeding. And eventually they got us a tour in Europe with a band called Hothouse Flowers, which were another Irish band they had done some kind of Eurovision thing the year before, and they were kind of big in Germany and Spain and that, and we kind of jumped on that. But nobody had a clue who we were. We treated it more as a holiday than a tour. We did a half an hour every night before them and just waiting for the call to be told that, thanks, but it's over.
I think what saved you was the fact that you'd been signed by Denny Cordell. And so he regarded it as his pet project. So I think if it had been a junior A&R man that assigned you directly to the record label in the UK, I think what you predicted would have happened. It would have been like, okay, thanks very much, on to the next act. But Denny, I think he kind of felt compelled to kind of give it one more last push, which is kind of what happened, really.
That's it. I mean, Denny, we weren't aware of it, but Denny had kind of sent out the radio pluggers in the States. He kind of gave up himself on the UK and Europe and all that. And he just went to college radio and he sent out the island pluggers, and that was it. I mean, they added up. It sounded like nothing else at the time. And because this is the beginning of grunge in many ways, and we're in there with, string sections and, and a female vocal kind of quite high and, angelic. And it just, I think because of that, it kind of stood out. And we got a call out of nowhere. I mean, not the call we expected. It was the call that, Linger is taking off and drop everything and come to the States. And that was it. We'd about a week or so left in the Hot House Flowers tour, but we dropped off that and flew to the States. And then first gig was in Denver, and we walked out the first night. We were the opening act for Dead, and the place just went crazy. We couldn't believe it. We went from basically empty rooms to this, and it never stopped after that then.
I think the thing that happened there was that they were like, for a very small period of time, when they brought out their first EP, what was the name of that first EP that you did, Noel?
Was it Uncertain?
Uncertain, that's it.
Yeah.
So I think for that little period there, they were like the press darlings, And the press like it when they break an act. And if an act breaks without their effort, they don't really, they kind of lose interest. And I think what happened there was Uncertain came out, it kind of got them a little bit of coverage in the press, but then obviously taking a break and then doing the album all over again with me and so on. By the time we got around to releasing Dreams, and Dreams was released as a proper bona fide, pop single, alternative pop single. It was very different to the Uncertain EP, which was very kind of dark and moody, and the press kind of went, no, not for us. And once the press had decided that, they just didn't want to know. So when the album did come out, as I said, there was a lot of apathy from the British music press. It was like they just weren't bothered.
No, I mean, the weird thing I've always found is that, so we had this huge success in the States, and then the same album with absolutely no extra tracks, no changes,
remixes,
comes back out a year later and goes in, whatever, top 10 or something. I mean, it's just really weird. It shows you the power that back then journalists would have had. They could really make or break you. And I mean, we were still on tour in the States, so we weren't even touring in Europe. And the album was still, just because this band, they're big in America, we're going to check it out. And it was solely off that. And I mean, I know I kind of jumping around a bit here, but, when the college radio thing took at the time, then MTV kind of caught on to it. They wanted to be next in line. And after they took over, I mean, that's when we went from playing small clubs. We were still on the Dead tour, and we do, on the days off, we'd play our own gigs, and we were playing like in bars and the things you do when you start out. And we soon moved up to just having to do theatres on our own.
You did that tour with Suede as well, didn't you?
Dead was first, and then we did the Suede tour, and then I think we went straight from that to the Duran Duran tour, which was such a weird kind of change of so many different.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hot House Flowers, Suede, and Duran Duran.
Yeah. We like to play the gauntlet of music.
You paid your dues, mate. You paid your dues.
Yeah.
Can I be a little nerdy? Can we just sort of concentrate on Linger a little bit? Me, when I hear it, I hear tons of Smiths. I also hear, and it's got nothing to do with the fact that Dolores is also a girl, but I also hear some like Sundays in there. I hear some like openness that was really beautiful. And I also know, I'm friends with the Sundays guys. I know they're also huge Smiths fans as well. So it's probably is all Smiths. But was that any part of it? Did you sort of listen to the Sundays as well, or was that me just guessing?
No, we would have, particularly Ferg and myself would have listened to that first Sundays album when it came out. And it was around the time where we were kind of writing a lot of that first album. So there's definitely that influence in there. There's a song on the first album called Sunday.
Right.
Because I thought it sounded like the guitar.
Sundays.
Yeah. Sunday's never mentioned in the song. It's just every time before we had a name for it, we go play that one at like the Sundays, and it ended up being called Sunday to this day. Yeah. So you weren't wrong in hearing that. Yeah.
I certainly used it as a form of reference myself, as a kind of them and the Cocteaus and, all that kind of thing. That's what I thought. Look, if my hope was if the Cranberries do well, they're going to hopefully be as big as the Cocteaus and the Sundays. Never did we actually know that we'll completely, overtake that and take
you
on
have little faith, Steve. You have little faith. But all those bands, it's mad. Like, as I said earlier, I think that was us trying to be all those bands that we loved as teenagers. Again, the Cocteau Twins would have been a massive influence. And even that first EP, the Uncertain one, is very washy guitar sound like that. It leans far more into that. But I think when we did get to do Linger eventually properly, I mean, I think, Steve, I used a lot of your guitars. I had one Telecaster at the time, and I think you had brought stuff with you.
We did. I think we did a few things with some extra guitars. I always remember, I think the original demo of Linger, I think the arpeggio at the beginning was an electric with a lot of chorus on it.
Yeah.
Which I felt was wrong. And I always remember for Linger thinking that it was going to be different too. As you alluded to, Uncertain was very washed out, very kind of sonic, kind of reverbs and stuff. Whereas I felt for Linger, because of that constant drum roll, pattern that Ferg's playing through it needed clarity put into it. So I always remember suggesting to you that rather than doing it with electric, let's do the arpeggiated bit with a clean signal, like acoustics, and perhaps just a very clean electric, so it had that vibe. But one of the things I've discussed with Warren also was that, do you remember how we were trying to get the swing of the bass and the bass drum?
Yeah,
correct.
I'll never forget it. Yeah,
because it was.
Because we're talking about the time when you had to do it to tape. So it wasn't a case of kind of, let's just drop it in and, we would have to play it and play it and play it. So,
yeah. Although I think we did it to a click, so we didn't have to worry about doing everything again, but it was definitely getting Mikey and Ferg to do the bass drum and the bass line again. Because I wanted it to have a little bit more of a kind of a swing to it, because I think if you listen to the bass drum pattern on the demo, it's different. It's different to how we ended up with, and it's just all those things. Because it's one of those songs. It's a difficult one, because if you play it too slow, it can really drag, and if you play it too fast, it can really trip over itself. With the drum roll thing. So I always remember putting we put a lot of time and effort into making sure it had the right kind of intensity and rhythm and tempo, because it was a difficult one.
Everything about this, Stephen, you and I talked about this the other day, but the string line is a hook, the guitar line's a hook, the space, like you're saying, with the groove between the kick and the bass, it doesn't have any moments where it sort of has a lull. Because even when there's not much going on, the few things that are going on are really, really engaging.
Well, I think that's what kind of sums up that first album for me. But listening back to it, was, I know I often mentioned this to Noel, was how much space there was in between the instruments. And I think that's really its strength, that you're capturing this air between Dolores and the guitar parts that Noel's playing. And nothing really got in the way of each other. And I think we managed to achieve that just by osmosis. I don't think we really particularly gave it much thought. And Noel would do a part, and then perhaps I'd hand him a different guitar, and we might put a capo on so he plays a chord in a different voicing. But we didn't really do anything I just remember it being quite blessed. Everything we tried worked. So that was a nice thing,
It was a bit of a godsend that our abilities at the time were limited. We'd been playing a few years at this point, but nobody was a virtuoso coming in going, I want to do a big solo here. You were kind of pushing yourself as far as you could to the limits of what you could play. And we didn't know it at the time, but it was a blessing, I think, that it leaves that space then. Whereas if everybody come in, I want to, do this and do that, it could have been a mess. And it's one of the things, even when I hear it today, there is that space where there's enough room for each instrument, especially when you've got that much strings in there. Trying to fight with that and Dolores's vocal would have been a sin.
personally, I find that a common denominator in music that really does change people, what really affects us, is that, I wouldn't want to say simplicity, because that sounds such a naive thing to say, but all your parts are supportive of each other. There's nobody, like you're pointing out, trying to be a virtuoso. There's no doesn't feel like somebody disappeared into a closet for 6 hours and came back and got, I got this part. It feels like everybody's there.
That came later.
Tempo-wise, did you record multiple versions at different tempos, or how did you do it? Did you do a lot of pre-production and get it figured out in pre-production what the tempo was going to be?
We didn't have much chance for pre-production. Once we were given the go-ahead to go in and do the album proper, I literally just turned up in Dublin and we just went in the studio and played. But it was the days of recording on 2-inch, and so it would be the SMPTE code, and we put down a kind of click because we did want the track to be a good constant rhythm. And I think we tried a couple of versions at a tempo and then settled on the one that we finished up with. But as I said, once we'd done this pass, I think I got Fergal to do his drums, the snare bit, separately from the bass drum, so we could kind of separate sound sonically as well, because the snare had to have a very distant thing. He didn't want a very close sound on it. And I think once we got that initial track done, and Noel had done his bed of guitars and everything, we were pretty much on the way there. The vocal was on and everything, but something was really bugging me about what was happening on the bottom end with the bass drum and the bass. So that's why we went around a few times and experimented with changing that, But I also remember Dolores singing it like an angel. She did. I mean, she sung, and that really high operatic part that she sings. I mean, she that came like that. It was really. It just it happened beautifully. We didn't struggle with that part at all.
How long had you been playing this song at this point, Noel, before you recorded it?
A good few years. Like, I remember being in my bedroom coming up with the initial part for that, like it was yesterday, just sitting there and thinking, wow, that's something. And then, bringing it into the two boys, and then meeting Dolores months later. And it was the first song. I used to give Dolores cassettes back then, and it was the first thing I ever gave her, was that on that Sunday. And then she came back, I think it was a Thursday or something like that, with the vocal and that string part that she had. She had this tiny little keyboard she used to carry around, and that was it. So we, and even back then in the first early shows we did, it stood out amongst all the other songs, to the point we didn't have enough songs for the first few gigs, so we do Linger as the first and last song.
So it's a weird song because there's not many songs that start with a piece that is in a completely different time to the main body of the song.
I don't know.
And that was the other thing. That was the other thing we had to kind of try a few times, wasn't it? To get right that kind of transition, because as that first part fades out and then the da comes in, it was really. It took a few tries, but again, we got there in the end. And
I do that second nature now if I was to play it, but at the time I don't know what I was thinking. Why I'm going to put this piece in here? It doesn't have anything to do with the song. But the thing is, the amazing thing about that D chord is when you play those first few notes at a gig, the whole place just goes mental straight away. So it, but like you said, Steve, it took us a few passes to get it to the transition to just be right.
You went back into the studio pretty quickly. I mean, was the emphasis now finally that it's a hit? You're touring like crazy, and then no need to argue, it's only a year later. I mean, that's pretty intense.
What actually happened was the songs in the first album are everything we had up to that point, everything we'd written. And we kind of, there was a few crappy ones, we kind of threw them out along the way, but what we felt was strong enough. But I mean, even when we were in recording the first album, we were still writing new songs. There's a song called Not Sorry that we only came up with, I think, Steve, were we in Surrey Sound or Maison Rouge or one of those, I think. And kind of came up with the idea on the day, and then we developed it literally that afternoon, and it ended up on there. So we kept writing the whole time. And then, we did the album, went started touring, and we were just writing the whole way along. And suddenly, before we knew it, we had enough for a second album in a very short space of time. I always look at that period as just one long writing session, from meeting Dolores to right up until, we kind of finished the tour of that second album. That's all we did. If we had spare time, we did that. So we had enough songs for a second album. Like, we were playing Zombie ages before we ever got in the studio. We were kind of playing that at shows and stuff like that. So we had all these songs. And I think the fact that it took so long for the first album to finally break, that it looked like we'd kind of done this back to back. But for us, there was a 2-year gap there. And then we said, right, I know we're touring, the first album's doing great, but let's just start doing the second album. And that's when we asked for Steve if he could come over to New York.
It's interesting because obviously the story of most bands, and I'm sure Steve's experienced this many, many times, the band comes in with the first record. They spend, the old story goes, their whole life writing their first record. And then they have that sophomore slump, the famous, they've put all their heart and soul, where you, because of the circumstances of how the first album broke, have all this really powerful stuff because you're writing all the way through, and you come in with No Need to Argue, and then with Zombie, you have another equally as massive song, which is remarkable and goes against all kind of, examples.
I mean, that's the joy of being that naive about it. I mean, you just get on with it, and that's exactly what we did. We honestly thought this is what every band does. You tour and you write, and that's it. And it is a shock. Yeah. And I mean, it's a shock the first time you kind of go through a kind of if you want to call it a writer's block, because you've had this long run for a few years and you've never had a problem. They're simple songs, I know, but they're, it's just the way that we put them together. And suddenly, one day you wake up and you go, oh, I don't have any ideas. What something suddenly became very natural to you for a few years isn't there. It's a massive shock to the system initially, and you kind of panic a little bit. You learn as time goes on, that passes. But I mean, at that time, Dolores and I just, we kind of, if I gave her a cassette with 5 songs, she usually came back with 3 or 4 that we're going to develop these, and it went like that. And then at the same time, Dolores began to kind of come in with more of her own songs as well, because I think she was probably too shy initially on the first album, more so than anything. She had these songs, but didn't really know us enough. So you had it coming from both sides then. And we kind of developed the idea, we do sound check, and that's when we'd kind of work it out with the 2 boys then. And that you get that Cranberry sound then when the 4 of us are playing together. And I think, Steve, you'll agree that when we went in to do the second album, how much tighter we were as a band.
Yeah, I alluded to this when I spoke with Warren previously. I think the way I kind of put it is that you'd been given the ball and you were going to run with it. You weren't going to let it go, because suddenly you've got this thing where 1 minute you think the moment's passed, and next minute you're like, everyone loves you and the record's in the chart and it's in there for about the best part of a year, and you're thinking, well, they love us and they love what we're doing, so let's get creative, let's keep going, So I mean, it was so obvious to me that you had tightened up as musicians and players from all that touring that you'd done, in that period between the 2 albums. It really was evident. I mean, I guess most probably you wrote Zombie because you wanted some more up-tempo songs in the set. Is that right? You're having to do longer sets now, weren't you?
That's it. And
you were headlining.
We had to do longer sets, and we'd also discovered, like, we did that thing initially where this live, it was like no distortion. We're not going to, for us, distortion was like a heavy metal band. That's who uses that. Yeah. And then realized with Zombie, Dolores came in with that, and she was like, we started off with it, and it was like another Cranberries kind of sounding thing. And she was like, no, this is an angry song. It needs to be louder somehow. And that's why, Fergal took off straight away, kind of hammering the drums, and to keep up with that, I literally had to go out and buy a distortion pedal And then we were like, hold on a minute, we still can keep the melody with the distortion. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a wash of noise. And started doing that live, and then that brought us into a whole new kind of heavier sound, faster songs, and kind of not as, I guess, polished sounding as we might have been when we were, a few years earlier. And again, it was just that massive learning curve that for us, it's early days, and it's kind of, you're learning all the time between being in the studio and then having to do a full tour as the headline act and, fill an hour and a half at least every night. It forces you to do things. And for us, thankfully, it was good things that we were made learn how to make it better.
There's something about that guitar line, the naivety that it sounds like her playing, that just makes it, how to explain it? It just makes it so honest. I think it's one of the most honest sounding songs out, especially a song that's a full production, because it's very easy, and this speaks to both of you guys here and Dolores, of course. It's very easy easy is the wrong word, but when you hear beautiful songs like Working Class Hero, Redemption Song, you get it because you hear a solo performer with an acoustic guitar singing from their heart. But here we have a song like Zombie, which is massive. It's got huge drums, massive guitar sound. And yet little things like that little guitar part brings you back to the girl singing the song and makes you hear the lyric even more. It was a really beautiful touch.
For me, I mean, the thing was maintaining still that when we went back to the verses of the song did have a lot of space, so that there was that element of the Cranberries in it, that kind of give some space for her to do her performance. But I think what another thing that applies to this particular song is that when we were recording it, I didn't feel the pressure on my shoulders. It's got to be a hit. It's got to be a single. Because for me, I wasn't thinking of it as a single. I was just thinking this is a really good up-tempo song for the record, because the two big hits so far that the Cranberries had were Dreams and Linger, and this was so far removed from that. I thought there's no way this is ever going to be a single. So I don't know if you can say the same here, Noel, but I didn't feel any pressure. I just felt like we're going to have fun with this. We're just gonna out smash the Smashing Pumpkins. You know what I mean? We're just going to have fun with it. We're going to just have and go for it. And so I think we just didn't get too precious about it. And I think that's part and parcel of why it was a success as a recording. What do you think, Noel?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, if anything, I think we probably obsessed about Ode to My Family more than Zombie. Yeah. Again, with the bass and drum, the kick drum, but that's the different department to mine. So, but we knew, like, we'd been playing it a long time live, and we kind of had gone around a circuit so many times that people got to know the song. So we knew the reaction it got live. And
it was a good one live then, yeah?
It was massive. Yeah. When you start a song starts to move further back to set, that you leave it to the last song because it's the big, finale. Yeah. And that's kind of what had happened with it. And it worked live. And then, we still didn't think it was going to be a single, especially the first single.
Yeah.
And I think when we heard it recorded and then we knew the reaction had gone live, that we certainly pushed for it. And also it was different to Dreams and Linger, because every band must have that fear of, I don't want to sound the same, like, a one-trick pony kind of thing. Yeah. So for us, it had all the elements for the first single, and we thought, look, we still have Ode to My Family, which is more a traditional Cranberry sound, as the second single then. So as you said, Steve, we just did it. We didn't overanalyze the thing in any way.
Yeah. And I think that comes to this honesty that Wilm's talking about. There's something about it that you can tell it's not being forced. It's very much a band performing in the studio. It really is.
Especially, because I suppose the cynical way would be like, it's like the grunge thing with the big guitars. But all of that stuff by that point, by 94, was like so obvious. And, when the heavy guitars come in on this, there's still that naive, sloppy rock feel about it. It doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like five
yeah.
mics on different amps all stacked together, all EQ'd, so it destroys you. It sounds like a bunch of guys and girls getting together and actually still being in a band, which makes sense now that you're describing this sort of process of like demos and writing, doing the first record, the second, the fact that there was this continuous sort of feeling.
I mean, we're using different amps as well. By this point, I think, Noel, you had a Marshall stack as well. Is that right? Because I think in the first album, it's just an AC30.
Yeah, that's right. And it's still, through all the albums, the AC30 has kind of been the main, workhorse. Yeah. But we definitely, for this, we used a Marshall, I think it was a J200 or something like that, or I can't remember. But and I had also bought more guitars. I think I had a Les Paul at that point.
Yeah,
I had had a Telecaster like literally for years before that, and that was the only thing. So you're kind of learning, and I actually don't think we used a distortion pedal on the recording. I think we drove the amps kind of, and it's there. That's the sound from what I recall. But
I think we might have used a Rat for one thing.
Did we?
Yeah, just for one sound, just to give it that real kind of, blitzed out.
Because during the verse, I'm actually not doing a whole lot.
No.
I kind of just hitting the chord once, every bar, and that's it. I mean, it's the bass and the drums are really driving that for a lot of that song.
Absolutely.
Until the chorus, obviously, and then it opens up. But like, it's such a fun song to play live.
I can imagine.
And when Dolores would play the opening chords, it would just kind of, there's not many people left on the planet, I think, that don't know that song now.
Yeah.
Of every kind of age, because I've kids who are of, they're now 20, 21, but even when they first started going out, they'd be sending videos of like these dance mixes of Zombie and all these kind of awful, this is on where I'm out, and kind of, it's like, oh God, but I mean, it has just, I suppose it's almost 30 years old, and it's definitely stood the test.
So you were talking, you were alluding to, I don't think you said this phrase, but writer's block. After No Need to Argue, do you think, is that where it came in?
Yeah, definitely. Look, we've always thought hindsight, is a great thing. We should have stopped after No Need to Argue. We had been at it, I guess, about 6 years or something at that point, non-stop. I mean, it literally was our lives. It was tour, album, kind of thing. And, look, it's great. It's what you hope for when you start in a band and you have all the success. And it was all the things, we couldn't believe it. We pinched ourselves nearly every day to think that, we've had the success. But then we were tired and we were running out of ideas. But the record company and the management we had at the time just thought, there's more to be made here, to be honest. And then we, foolishly, we agreed to do it. And we went off and did another album where, for me, I wasn't that into it. I think I've only about five songs in the whole album that I've involved with writing wise. Just wasn't there, and it really felt like you were going to work, as opposed to just the joy of kind of if you think back, Steve, you found a video of us in the Manor recording the drums and bass for the second album. We were there for a few weeks, and it was fun. We just spent most of the day laughing. Just I don't know how we got any work done, and that was great. That's the way it should be. It's what you imagine a band to be. Yeah. And suddenly, for the third album, it was like we were all kind of living in separate places, and we kind of meet up and do it. And then you'd go, "What time do you need me in?" There was none of the kind of I'm going to hang around today, and the fun of it. Yeah. And sure enough, we did that album. It came out, and then they had us ready to tour straight away, and we just didn't do the tour. Just Dolores said she wasn't able to deal with it anymore, and that was it. Tour was kind of cancelled. I think the album suffered a lot because of that, but genuinely, we didn't care. We had enough of it. Yeah. And I think at that point, if we'd have called it a day, I don't think any of us would have been too bothered at that moment. I've probably gone back to it later, but yeah, we learned a lot of lessons with that.
Tell us about Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. Did you, all this thought process and that I'm hearing from you, was that you making a conscious effort of like, we need to come back and rediscover our form, what we had on those first two records?
Yeah, like I know it's a cliche, but you do miss it. You go home, everybody went their separate ways. For the first time ever, we were all in different countries, kind of just living our lives. People started to get married, people started to have kids, and you kind of forgot about it a bit. And then I remember just sitting down one day, I kind of hadn't played guitar for a long time. I had no interest in it. And then just kind of came up with some ideas. I think there was Animal Instinct was one of the first kind of songs. And I kind of got a few ideas together, and this is like pre-internet. So I rang Dolores because we were still in touch, thankfully. You know, when we finished, everybody kind of went away and they were happy to go away and kind of live their lives for a while. So we spoke regularly enough. And then I said to her, look, I have a few ideas. I'm going to courier a cassette to you. This is how long ago it is now. And, you know, she was in Toronto at the time. And I did, and I sent it. And then she came back and said, yeah, I've got some ideas too. And, you know, I like what you've got here. And we kind of started to put ideas together. And then normally what would happen is at this point, if we had a few ideas, we kind of get just the bones of them together and then meet up with Mike and Ferg in a room to make it a Cranberries song then at that point. And that's kind of how it developed. And it was just a kind of, let's just do it and see how it feels and what happens. And you know, we realized we had been away for a while and maybe it won't work. But yeah, it was very organic the way it came back. And we told nobody. We just went off and did it ourselves.
That's beautiful. And what about the process, Stephen? Had you all remained in constant contact from that sort of period between No Need to Argue until Wake Up and Smell the Coffee?
We hadn't really been in touch much. I mean, because as Noel alluded to, they toured like crazy for the third album. I wasn't involved in the third album, so I didn't see or hear really from them throughout that period. And then they had this, as Noel said, they had this break. You know, they took a break from each other. So again, there was no contact. It wasn't until Wake Up, Smell the Coffee, and they actually had demos for that I think Noel got in touch with me again. Yeah. And I was delighted because I always cared about them. You know, I always feel very, especially, you know, bands like Blur and Cranberries, bands I have a long-term relationship with. It's more than just a working relationship. It's you know, you actually do care for them as people, and so yeah, I was delighted to be kind of asked to kind of work with them again. So we did that in Dublin, didn't we? No,
we did that in Dublin. We did that in the big windmill. We could afford the proper studio. Yeah.
But it was great. I mean, kind of hit the ground, kind of running, really, as we always do when we get in the studio together. It's a very nice natural working relationship, you know.
Yeah, that's the great thing about it. I mean, when the five of us would meet, it was like we only kind of took the weekend off. It just, you know, I think anytime you work with someone new for the first time, there's that kind of weird phase of, you know, getting to know each other, will it click and all these things, where that was all kind of gone. And it's great. It's just like you show up day one and probably Mike will usually abuse you, Steve, with some kind of, you know, within the first half hour and, you know, in jest. And and that's it. It kicks off straight away then. And it's great. And that feeling had come back then of actually enjoying it. You know, this is more like what it should be again.
Yeah.
And I mean, and we were back in Dublin where we had begun, you know, because the second album we did between the Manor and then we went to Townhouse for the kind of all the kind of vocals and, you know, all the extra bits. So we were back in Dublin where we began, and you know, we were kind of even gone back to kind of places we would have gone out when we did the first album and stuff.
Yeah.
So there was that familiarity there again. So it was great. It was a lot of fun to kind of do it. And, you know, and before we knew it, of course, we were back on tour with that album then. That wasn't the plan initially, but it's what ended up happening.
It's bound to happen, really, isn't it? Because there's a demand there for you.
Yeah, there is. And you start, when you're enjoying it like that and someone says you want to go on tour, you know, you jump on it, really.
So can you tell me a little bit about the recording? Time Is Ticking Out is a very powerful song. What was you co-wrote it with Dolores. What was the sort of writing process on it? Did you start off with something, you gave her some ideas?
Yeah, it was always that way, kind of. We never kind of sat in a room together. You would send an idea, like, again, it was back to cassettes, you know, so it was very basic. And eventually I got like a little 4-track that I could kind of put in a few overdubs on. And she'd kind of, I'd meet her then and kind of, she'd sit down in the corner with me and kind of go, look, I don't need this section. You can get rid of that. And then she'd get a keyboard and add in lines and things like that. And it would develop like that. And because we weren't touring this time, we actually did go in and rehearse for this album. We were never one to walk in with nothing. We'd always, you know, we wanted to show up with things. So we rehearsed, I think it was in Dublin as well, kind of before you came along, Steve. And I'm not sure if you even might have came over maybe once, but we developed them to the point we knew, you know, we were going in with Stephen and that they would be made into proper songs. So, and it wasn't that we were doing this and going on tour the following day. So we took them to a point that we knew we could go in and play them, and then, you know, the proper production process could begin.
I feel like with Dolores, you know, very often we talk about artists that are like able to lyrically like tap in to a consciousness, and then you think of songs like, obviously Linger as a love song is, you know, one of the finest ever written, but Time Is Ticking Out and Zombie are both very powerful. She's expressing stuff that people feel and don't know how to express.
It's social comment, isn't it?
It's social commentary, but in such an emotional way that actually taps into like, oh, this is how I feel. I suppose it's a difficult sort of question for you to answer, but I mean, were you aware of that? Did you think that?
Those kind of songs, yeah. I know we spoke about it a few times, that especially as we went on in the later albums and we were touring all the time, when you're in a hotel room back then, before, again, the internet, the only English-speaking channel you have is CNN. That's what's on the TV all the time, just as noise in the background. But she said that she'd have it on in the room and you suddenly realise kind of how messed up things are in the world. Because when you're at home, you're doing your thing and you're not watching or paying as much attention to things. So we toured a lot, which meant a lot of CNN, which woke her up to a lot of things that she realised were going on in the world. And she always spoke her mind, you know, and we all knew that. And she could sing, you know, she could write a love song as quickly as she could write a song about, you know, kids dying or the state of the planet or so on. You know, sometimes people would say, oh, what's it like to be in a political band? We never were. And it was just, there'd always be like one song or maybe two on an album. Like 90% or more of the songs in an album were about relationships. You know, and but if she had something to say, if she felt strongly enough about it, she would say it. And instead of kind of, you know, going on the news and kind of, or, you know, over to the UN or something, her way of doing it was to write a song. And that's why songs like this came about.
So now you have a few more years off.
Yeah.
And you come back again to do Roses. Stephen, by this time you're thinking, I'll hear from them every like 6 or 7 years, or give me a call and we'll make a record.
We had definitely rebuilt bridges making a Wake Up Smell the Coffee album. And I did stay in contact with Noel throughout this next period, although they were taking a break from each other, you know, and having babies and whatever, families growing. We stayed in touch. And Yeah, and then the guys got in touch with me and said, we want to do some recording. I think this time Dolores wanted to record in Canada because she was moving house or something. She
was there a while. Yeah. I think she'd lived in Dublin for a while and then ended up going back to Canada, and they had just gone back. So
her kids were in school there, so she wanted to record there, didn't? Yeah.
And we just said, look, we kind of had never done that kind of thing where we, so just said, why not? And so, I mean, we got to live in a hotel for 6 weeks, kind of wined and dine. So, it wasn't as bad as it sounds at all. And it was good because the way, like, that we've always worked with Stephen is that, okay, you kind of go in the morning at 10 and you're there till whatever time in the evening. And then Monday to Friday, and we generally take the weekends off. So you kind of had a life kind of to go and do your thing outside of that. And that worked really well for us. We all liked that kind of way. And again, I had, at this point, a few years had passed, I had kind of started to learn how to use stuff like Logic and Pro Tools. And I was able to bring in kind of bigger pictures of what it was, the song kind of idea was. And again, it was a case of kind of, we don't need this, we don't need that, and we're going to keep this part and redo all of this kind of thing, So it just kind of, it was the next kind of progression in that, the writing process in many ways. And it made it a bit easier in that, like, for the four of us to be in the same place became harder because of just the logistics of it, people's lives, people living in different places. And to do it this way was a little bit easier then. It wasn't kind of, I don't think we even rehearsed before we went in for the Roses album, Steve. I think we all met in Canada and we had these demos and we kind of started picking through them.
As you said, there were some stems to your demos that we kept because they just had a vibe that was, there was a little bit of electronica, which gave us a little new element, to kind of work with. I actually think this album is a better album than Wake Up Smell the Coffee.
Yeah.
It's a shame because it's overlooked because I think the band were kind of between labels at the time. Yeah. And so they didn't have the big kind of machinery of a big label behind them to promote this particular record. And I think it's a bit of a shame, really, because I actually think it's a better album than Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. I don't know how you feel about it.
No, I agree. It's actually, it's one of my favorite albums that we've done. And I think it was a great vibe recording that album. We had a lot of fun again doing it. And it was great to be away where you could just, you get up and you were just focused on doing that album. And, we did tour it and we did, again, it brought another element of like the little bits of electronic stuff, trying to use those live for the first time as well. And it kind of got lost in the mix of a lot of record company politics at the time. We've always felt that. But in saying that, a lot of the fans, the hardcore Cranberries fans, know these songs and we've played them, we've kept them in the set when we were touring up until the very end. And they'd know, again, the opening chords of whatever song it might be. They'd know what it is. So, I'm really, really proud of that album. It's, if it's that or the third album, I'd be taking this one like a lot more.
I suppose let's talk about In the End. Now, Dolores obviously died in January of 2018, and had you at this point been writing and working on material? Because obviously, as Stephen was just talking about, some of Roses was actually some of your demos that you've been doing. Yeah. I see. Obviously, you're sitting in your own studio there, and and you've obviously done solo records as well, which Stephen, I think you've worked with together as well.
Yeah.
With this going into this record, Stephen had expressed in the interview we did previously, that's already up. You took a lot of the demos, etc., and built upon that. Can you sort of expand upon that for us?
Yeah, like there was a couple of songs left over from the Roses album that we kind of, from my memory, we ran out of time to record them. So there was one or two there that I kept on drives here. And then what had happened, I guess 2017 was Dolores's health had suffered a lot in the years in between, and she basically she collapsed one night, and we had to cancel the tour. She went back to New York. She had this ongoing back problem for a long time, and the tour was cut short. And doctors had said to her, "You can't tour for at least 8 months or more." And we had just coincidentally kind of been talking at sound checks about writing new songs. We were doing this kind of a semi-acoustic tour where we were doing some of the songs acoustically, some kind of electric, but it was toned down, and we had like a quartet with us, and it was just a kind of a reimagining of older songs. And we were getting to the point where we kind of think, enough of these, like let's write new songs. So that conversation began. Tour got cancelled. Dolores is back in New York, and I was here initially. I said to her, "Look, I think I have some really rough ideas. Would you be into kind of using the time off to basically write a new album, and then we can, when you're better, we can record it?" She loved the idea. So I actually up sticks and went to France on my own for a while. And I spent 3 weeks in Cannes writing. That's all I did every day. And a lot of what was in the end album came from that 3 weeks of my share of things. Dolores at the meantime had been in Canada kind of working on bits and pieces she had as well. There was a guy she used to work with over there that she wouldn't be very techie, so Dan would come in, or her partner at the time. She was in New York at this point. So I would send her the ideas, she'd relay down rough vocals, guide vocals, and she'd send back that stuff. So I had all that on my drives here, and she had been building her collection of songs in New York as well. And then, that was it. We hadn't really told anybody about this. I mean, literally, her and I knew, and the engineers involved. And then Dolores passed away January, out of the blue, and we had only been talking literally the day before about coming up with a date to start looking at getting in the studio to record. And because we knew we had a good choice of songs at this point. So then, obviously Dolores passed away. That was January. And then I think I said, I'm going to have a look. Once the kind of dust settled, came out here, started going through the drives, and suddenly realised, I knew she had a lot of stuff in New York, and I kind of thought, there's a lot of stuff here. It would be a shame to never do anything about it. So I spoke to the two boys then, started sending them the demos, and they loved what they heard. And I think at that point then, Steve, is when we called you. And it was your suggestion, Steve, that once you had heard the demos, instead of kind of waiting and leaving time go by and kind of maybe you wouldn't feel the same in a year's time, I think you said, look, we should do this and do it sooner than later, because
I mean, what I was worried about though was like that we wouldn't be seen as kind of being opportunist and scraping the barrel. So I kind of really felt that what I wanted. I asked you to do was send me everything you had so that I could listen to everything, try and get some shape and because as you know, sometimes, especially some of the ones that Dolores had on her drives, they were just like little sketches, weren't they? Yeah. So it was a case of but then she had some more fully formed recordings that she'd done with session musicians. So it was like one extreme to the other. So, but the thing was, I felt that what we needed to do was take stock, really kind of like only work on the best of what was there rather than trying to work on everything, So I always remember saying to her, let's cut it down to the best 10 or 12, and then we'll go with that. And that's what we did. So those recordings that were done, either the ones that Dolores did with session musicians or indeed the ones that she did over your demos or whatever, we made glorified click tracks out of those. So we had Dolores's voice And then so that I could then play that back to when the boys came over to London, they could play to that. So it felt like she was there with us, while we were doing the backing tracks. And it worked, I think. It turned out, it was a sad, occasion, obviously. I think it was quite emotional for the guys to hear her voice in their headphones while they were kind of tracking through things. But I think, it was a very productive session, wasn't it, Noel? I think we did 3 weeks at Core Studios, and that was it.
Yeah, we did 3, and then I did a week with you.
Yeah, you came with me to my studio.
And then you mixed, a few weeks later. And I mean, the reaction kind of is really, will tell you, the reaction to it will tell you how it went, because everybody loved it. And I remember I went over to, it was BMG we were with, and remember, Steve, I went over with, you were like, played that one and that one. I played 2 or 3 songs, and it was one of the best things I'd heard was when the head guy there said, it sounds like the 4 of you are in the same room together. And that's what you want. It's not like there's a vocal and we're kind of, of messing around. It just sounded like one piece. And that was the goal really all along. And once I kind of heard that, you kind of knew you're going down the right track with it.
So 3 weeks, that was all the process needed.
For the 3 weeks, do the main backing tracks. That is the main rhythm guitars, bass and drums to all the songs. And I would also do a few overdubs with Noel, but I knew there was a few final touches I needed him to come in and do. So we did that. There's a couple of little keyboard things that Noel played as well. I played a couple of bits and pieces on a few bits, and then it was ready for mixing.
Was there any technical challenges just from the way the vocals recorded in different environments?
Sometimes if the vocal was recorded badly, I would then kind of EQ the song so the vocal had like a lo-fi type vocal sound, because that's all I could do with it. There's a couple of songs where you hear like a voice being slightly filtered because it suited that thing. And the only other thing we had to do also was, of course, the Cranberries are well known for having harmonies to all the vocal lines, and sometimes the vocal parts where there should be a harmony, there wasn't one. So we got in the singer that sang with the band live, Joanne, isn't it?
Joanna, that's right.
Joanne.
Yeah,
we got her in to come in, and because she was so used to doing harmonies to Dolores live, she was very sympathetic in the sound that she could create with her voice. She could shape her vowels to sound more like Dolores. So that was something we had to do. That was a little bit more complicated, kind of getting extra vocal bits sorted out. But it worked. It was well worth doing because, as I say, Joanne was part of the team. She was part of the live side of things. So it felt right. We didn't just get any kind of anyone in.
Exactly. Because we did discuss quite a few times about what was the best way to do that and who should we get. And Johanna lived in LA at the time, and it meant bringing her all the way over and everything. But it definitely, there's points there where you'd have to tell people that it's her, So we were delighted that we did it, because those songs would have just sat on a drive forever, never seen the light of day. I think there's 11 songs on there, and I think it was a nice way to end it for the fans as well. That, without these demos and doing that album, it would have just ended the day Dolores passed away. That would have been it. There would have been no more, because there wasn't anything. But then to have this and go, look, this is the kind of the bookend to it now here. And then they all loved it because they had another 11 songs that they didn't think a few months earlier, that they were going to have. And I think just the whole emotions that were floating around at the time, it all kind of soaks into those songs. You can kind of feel it on the record almost. It just, it was definitely the right thing to do, to go in. I think it was April, Steve, was it? Or that we went in?
Yeah, late April, early May we started,
Yeah, and it was definitely, I don't think we could have captured it if we'd have waited any longer.
I understand what you're both saying. Keep the sort of momentum going. You're in the process of writing, demoing songs. Just do what you would have done anyway if you were going to make the record. So, Noel, now you're doing solo stuff, although you were doing solo stuff during that period because you have your own label.
Yeah. Yeah, like I've always, a lot of the time that stuff were songs I probably would have written for Cranberries stuff, and then it didn't fit, and, gone off and done it with other things. So, yeah, I've been doing kind of, it was weird because obviously, so used to writing with Dolores for so long, and kind of having that kind of soundboard that you could bang ideas off. And that isn't there anymore. And even to this day, when I write anything, there is a little part you're going to wonder what she would have done with that or this kind of thing. But yeah, I just been kind of writing, and just the last few months since Christmas now, I've been working on a soundtrack for a HBO thing that's nearly done, which has been a whole new world for me. Having deadlines, I'm not used to that, So yeah, but it's been fun. It's been a massive learning curve, and it's been good. I've really enjoyed it. But yeah, a lot of time in this room since January. But then again, what else am I doing? We're locked up, So, yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that. That was unbelievable. If you haven't already, please check out the other interviews with Stephen. There's more to come, and have a marvelous time. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, goodbye, tschüss.